I PR'd on bench today. Terraria. We all know it. We all love it. A lot of people play it, apparently. Like, eighth best-selling game in the world. What is that? I've been playing Terraria since I was like 9 years old. It's actually like more than half my life. That's kind of crazy to think about. But, you know, after playing Terraria for literally a decade, at least, you know, it gets a little stale, a little bit. There's only so much content in the game. But that's where modding comes in. And Terraria's modding community is honestly like probably one of the best in modern gaming, especially with Minecraft killing off mods basically entirely on Bedrock. I don't know, who knows, maybe Java next. I want to say it was during the pandemic. Maybe maybe I just started high school. I played through the Calamity mod. I actually don't think I finished it. I've since finished it now, but that kind of just showed me that Terraria really does have a lot of potential for adding in a lot of content through mods. And also for me as, you know, an artist and a game designer, pixel art has always been pretty interesting to me. So even back then when, again, I was probably 15 years old, I was like, hey, I'm gonna take a stab at this, you know, try to make myself a Terraria mod. And then I realized that programming is hard. I had actually never touched C# in my life, which is the language that Terraria uses. And C# is by no means like a complicated language. It's, you know, pretty standard, but I had just never touched it. The only programming languages I've ever really programmed in are, I guess, just Python and Java, which, you know, are very different from a compiled language. Any programming nerds out there that have any clue of what I'm talking about? Probably like 2 people. Oh, my iPad is about to die. I've been using for my script. I'm going off the cuff anyways, it's fine. I found actually that the creators of Tmod Loader did in fact make an example mod that gives you sort of an idea for how the different classes and things work in Terraria. You know, for my first item, drew this little sword sprite. I think I called it like the Storm Crusher or something. Gave it some damage and knockback values. And that was about it. I was like, man, this stuff is hard. But only within the past couple of months, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take a stab at the modding thing again, because I still had my old project files, and I just got going. Just started modding, started adding new stuff. I added like a hand cannon thing, revamped the Storm Crusher, made it actually like somewhat cool. But I was like, nah, I gotta do something like elaborate, shit people have never seen before. And by shit people have never seen before, I guess I just meant make some slightly more interesting guns, like a Dragon's Breath shotgun. Ooh. I did make the shotgun itself deal like melee damage with a bayonet, I guess. Kind of interesting. So I wanted to make an animated weapon. That was like my first real challenge. Like at this point, I've made like 5 items in the mod. I tried animating this like double barrel machine gun thing with like oscillating barrels when you shoot it, and it wouldn't work. I couldn't figure out why. I was like, that doesn't make sense. There's animated items in vanilla Terraria, like the last prism and the laser machine gun. How do those things work? So I look in Terraria's files, you know, look for the textures, and I noticed that their prefix in Terraria's internal files are projectiles. And I was like, what? They're projectiles? They're not items? What I realized they do is they create a projectile that like locks onto your player's position and just follows your hand, and that projectile then spawns more projectiles. So I figured out how to program it, you know, got it all working. I was like, but I need more though. This needs to be even cooler. I added like dust particles that come out when you shoot. I made it to where, depending on which frame of the animation it is, it knows which barrel is shooting, so the bullets that come out of the gun are actually offset vertically up or down based on which barrel is supposed to be shooting. I made it slow down the player when they're shooting it and physically push them backwards with each shot. And I even added little bullet casings that fly out, which are actually gores, like the NPC body parts that fly out when you kill stuff. It's a gore. But, you know, as I was making this and, you know, figuring out how this projectile gun code type stuff worked, got me to then be able to make even more elaborate weapons that were, you know, fun little modded items. I was having fun making these, and I was like, you know what, if I want to be serious with this project and I want to flesh out this mod, I can't just be throwing together random items just because stuff seems cool. There has to be like a core unifying idea. So one of the things that I first kind of went to for inspiration on like how I should theme the mod was actually my original name for it from back when I made the project file when I was like 14 or 15 years old. I don't remember what made me think of this name or why I named it this, but I named my mod Odyssey, which I still think is a pretty good name, and I feel like it kind of implies a sense of like adventure and exploration. I was like, okay, what can I do that will enhance sort of this Odyssey type vibe? A class that kind of encapsulates this idea of this just like, I don't know, rogue adventure kind of thing. Not a rogue. Calamity did that already. They beat me to it. And the first idea I had was, I think, an alchemist, that they would have like bombs and potions. But then I realized it would be a little bit hard to differentiate that from like magic and ranged. Kind of just seems like the two smushed into one. Then I got kind of stuck. I was sitting around trying to figure out a class I should add to my mod for like a week. And then I was talking with one of my friends, and he said, what if there was a class that used stratagems? Because we'd been playing a lot of Helldivers 2, obviously. And he was like, what if there was a class that sort of revolved around having these like powerful abilities that are on long cooldowns, which you have some stuff in Terraria like that already, like the Forbidden armor has that armor set bonus, but it's not really like a core mechanic of any of the classes. So I was like, okay, that's an interesting idea. And another thing I wanted to do to tie my mod into vanilla and make it feel anchored, a part of the vanilla world, I guess, was make one of the existing groups of weapons that's like not super big part of my damage class, which originally, since I wanted to do the alchemist, I was gonna make like the whole 2 flamethrowers the alchemist damage. But with this new class I was adding, I was like, well, what can I do? When I was thinking about adding these stratagems, you know, another thing that's very similar to stratagems in modern gaming would be kill streaks in Call of Duty. And in probably Modern Warfare 2019, I'm not sure which one, don't really care to look it up. When you call down, I think the precision airstrike or one of those, your character pulls out like this laser pointer and you mark where you want it to go. And I was like, that would be a really interesting mechanic if you could mark where you want these abilities to go, and that's just kind of the way the whole class works. So I decided I would make all of the dart weapons, all like 4 of them, into this new damage class, the tactical class. And really the main 2 things you have are just your stratagems and your marking weapons. But the way this whole core system works, and just let me break it down for you really quick. So very similar to the summon class, the main weapon that you are using as the player most of the time is going to be your marking weapon. And the marking weapon doesn't have a very high damage output, but the marking weapon is what sort of enables you to do more damage when you play your cooldowns correctly. Each marking weapon has its own independent % chance of marking a target for its own independent set amount of time. So certain late hard mode tracking weapons would have a very high chance, like an 85% chance of marking your target for 5 seconds. But in the early game, the earliest game actually, with the blowpipe just has a 50% chance of marking a target for 3 seconds, which is still pretty good, but you're probably gonna have to hit a target a couple times before they're actually marked. But once you do get that marker on a target, you or anybody can then use a stratagem on this marked enemy. Now, the reason I say you or anybody is because the marker does not work the same as summon tagging, which is sort of just like a client-side thing. With the tactical class, since this effect doesn't last forever, I wanted it to be better than just a client-side, like, oh, focus all my attacks on this thing, right? You can actually mark as many enemies as you want. And when these enemies are marked, it's actually stored in the game internally as a debuff effect, which means it's not client-side, it's server-side. And let's say for some reason you're doing a run where you and your friend you're playing co-op with are both using the tactical class, you could shoot an enemy with your tracking weapon, and then your teammate goes over and hits that tracked enemy with their stratagem, which sort of adds this like co-op type element that, I mean, I don't know, I feel like we don't really get that in Terraria otherwise. And when you use these stratagems, it creates this cooldown graphic over the player, and this cooldown is shared amongst all stratagems, but the cooldown is not the same for all of them. Now, the importance of marking an enemy when you use these stratagems is not just for targeting. There are stratagems that are more like airstrikes, like a napalm strike or some kind of projectile, you know, flies out of the air. One of the ones I made that drops from the Eye of Cthulhu, it's called the Eye Candy. Get it, Eye Candy, whatever. Now, for some stratagems, because they're not all airstrike or projectile type things, targeting wouldn't make sense. For example, with a set that I'm going to get to later, I added this weapon that creates a glowing mushroom spore explosion out of the player. Just a radius that erupts out of you and you damage everything around you, even through walls, right? That wouldn't make sense to target that on an enemy. So for certain stratagems, like this one, they have different effects. With the fungal spore explosion thing, it just makes you do double damage. Another thing that I wanted to be unique about this class is the dart weapons not really scaling in their effectiveness solely off of damage. With the darts, which there are a lot of, by the way, I think I actually have more darts now than like bullets and arrows. You have to pick, okay, do I want to have good solid damage output, or do I want a dart that can mark as many enemies as possible, maybe not do as much damage, but get a lot of enemies marked or mark them more consistently? So with the darts, and this is kind of a precedent that already existed in vanilla Terraria, I wanted all of the projectiles to have very unique effects, where it's not just this dart is better than the early game dart because it does more damage and that's it. No, I wanted there to be very unique, distinct effects that set them apart, that fit with different playstyles or different builds, different class setups, so that there's a lot of customization. Now, in the early game, you know, you got your seeds and you have poison darts, but I wanted there to be another standard base ammo type that's not just seeds, because the seeds suck and they don't even have like knockback, I don't think. They also can't deal critical hits. I added just a regular dart. You make it out of iron bars, and that's like your new default ammo. And when you get to hard mode, you get the crystal ball that you make an endless dart bandolier. That's your endless musket pouch or endless quiver, right? But in addition to the regular dart, you can also make piercing darts. Another one that you can make once you've gotten wires is a pulse dart. There's energized dart, there's luminite darts of cleansing dart, there's snaggletooth dart, there's venom dart. There's flurry dart, there's hellfire dancing dart. Just there's even more that I am not remembering off the top of my head, because again, I'm going off the cuff. So it's a new day. I just realized that with the lighting setup I got some pretty nasty shadows behind me on my green screen. I didn't really get into the different dart weapons that I've added. For starters, really the earliest one that you can get in vanilla even is the blowgun, right? Or the blowpipe, sorry, two different things. And normally you have to just get it from chests, whether they be underground, you know, in those little hill cave things, just a regular wooden chest. But if it's a weapon that's kind of integral to a certain class, I didn't want to just be locked behind random RNG. I also added a recipe for it that's pretty easy. You just need bamboo. Aside from the blowpipe, another early pre-hard mode one that you could make is the hunting rifle, which is just something that you make out of, you know, the early pre-hard mode ores, which you could then upgrade with hellstone to make the hot shot. And then the hot shot, even later on in hard mode with a frost core, you can turn it into the icy hot, because I don't know, I thought it was funny. And something that I did with the hot shot and the icy hot that I didn't really realize you could do is make it to where the projectiles that they shoot, no matter what dart you're using, can inflict a debuff effect. The chance that you actually inflict these debuffs is directly tied in with marking the enemies. So if you get a mark off, that enemy also gets either the on fire debuff in the case of the hot shot, or frostburn in the case of the icy hot. Another one I added is the Aranio Venator. Might change that name, sounds a little bit too nerdy. But you make it out of spider fangs. It's just pretty easy to make early hard mode type weapon. There's also the pipe rifle, which you make by combining a blowgun with a blowpipe. It's literally just the two strapped together. Later on, you can combine those two to make the pipe repeater, which is 4 blowpipes all strapped together, and it's like a pipe minigun. But that's enough about the tactician class. I'm sure if I continue making these videos, I'm gonna dive a lot deeper into that class, but there's plenty of other content that I've made that isn't tied down to that new damage class. One of them being the Nomad NPC. So the Nomad kind of works similar to the Skeleton Merchant, only he can spawn literally anywhere in the world, even above ground, just at a somewhat rarer chance. And the Nomad really just sells you random exotic items at a pretty high price. He's kind of just an extra traveling merchant type character that's a bit more hard to come across. Right now, he just sells a few random items that I made that I couldn't think of ways to really integrate into the mod in any other way. But if the mod ends up getting a lot of support and I set up like a Patreon or something, then I'm thinking I would want to add donor items similar to how mods like Calamity have that, and he would probably sell a lot of these donor items, which, by the way, if you do want to donate, I do have a Ko-fi account in the description. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, anyways, like I was saying, I really do want to have a sort of consistent theme of like exploration type stuff throughout this mod, which is part of the reason why I added the Nomad, but I also wanted to add some new ores. Right now, I do have an early game ore that you can get. You just need a gold or platinum pickaxe that spawns in the mushroom biome, because there really is no mushroom-based stuff other than shroomite, and that's, you know, way later in hard mode. And this ore that you can get is called Mycolite, and Mycolite allows you to make a few weapons, but its main selling point is that you can get a new armor set that has interchangeable helmets for each class, like hallowed armor or something like that. But when I was making it, you know, I just had the idea. I was like, oh, you know, universal armor set for pre-hard mode, that would be great, right? And I was like, well, why would you want to use this over just the established vanilla stuff like meteor armor or something like that? I thought, what if I make it like a mushroom symbiote that attaches to your character and, you know, covers your whole body or whatever? And since it's a symbiote, it would like augment your abilities. It's not just giving you defense and like a little bit of extra damage or something, right? So what I did is that each helmet has its own unique and pretty elaborate set bonus. The melee helmet, for instance, increases your base health points by 40. The ranged helmets, which there are 2, because I based each of these off the different mushroom types, and depending on if you're in Crimson or Corruption, it's either Vile or Vicious, whatever. They both actually reduce your vision. The Corruption one being, to a lesser extent, just gives you, what's it called, darkness, and the other one gives you blindness. Or wait, no. The Corruption one gives you blindness, and the Crimson one gives you blackout. I think that's what it's called. The Crimson one also gives you permanent hunter and danger sense. I designed it to look like a clicker from The Last of Us, so I was just thinking in my head like, oh, you can sense danger, but you can't really see that well, I guess, you know? For the Tactician class, it's a glowing symbiote helmet, and it actually improves your vision. It gives you permanent night vision, and it also gives you some mobility buffs like higher jump height, gives you permanent climbing claws, effects, stuff like that. For magic, it actually increases your mana regeneration rate, which, to my knowledge, there's really no armor that does that. That's only accessories. And for summoner, it gives you permanent thorns like cactus armor. As for the weapons you can make out of this, other than the shroomerang, which I just figured it would make sense if you could make the shroomerang with this. For melee, you've got the Shroom Shiv. It's just a little short sword that creates lingering spore projectiles when you hit stuff. For ranged, you have the Fungal Bolter, which is just an early game gun. And if you're in the Crimson, you get the Lamella, which is just a pretty standard bow, but has a chance of shooting a homing spore cloud that goes through tiles. For the tactical class, I already showed you the Festering Spores weapon, is what I'm calling it. Just a little spore explosion type thing. And for magic, you've got the Spore Staff, which wherever you click on your screen, it creates a randomized cluster of lingering spores. They're basically just the spores that the truffle NPC summons when he attacks, but, you know, recolored to match with the teal mushroom kind of motif I forgot with it. And for summoner, I'm gonna make a staff, but summons are really hard to program, and I'm like level 1 crook at C# right now, so it's a little over my head. I tried it. I also did pretty much the exact same thing with another ore that creates a universal armor set with the different helmets for later in pre-hard mode. This ore is called Frozen Remains, and right now I just have it generating in the underground snow biome, but it is going to generate in one of the new biomes that I'm going to make that's going to be called the Forgotten Grove. The biome is basically going to be like, if you've ever watched Ice Age 3, where there's just the jungle underneath the ice inexplicably, with a bunch of dinosaurs and crap, that's what it's going to be. But the ore itself is finished. I've made all the armor sets and stuff, and the consistent bonus for all of them over other late pre-hard mode armor sets that you can make is that they just have higher defense, but the class-specific bonuses aren't really quite as good. They also give you resistance to cold damage, which is what the snow armor does, which I didn't realize it did, but apparently it actually gives you resistance against the ice-based enemies. It also makes you immune to chilled and frozen. I actually do really love these designs. I just had a lot of fun with this aesthetic and making the different sort of bone helmets. And I did also like the weapons, which, speaking of, the first one, the melee weapon that I made, is the Flint War Spear. It's pretty typical spear, doesn't really do anything special other than being pretty fast. For ranged, you've got the Ancient Tusk Bow. Now this one, it creates these glowing flint arrows whenever you use, you know, normal wooden arrows. These flint arrows actually work kind of similar to how the javelins do in vanilla, where when you hit something, they impale into that enemy and stick to them, and the more things you have impaled in them, it creates this stacking damage over time bonus. For magic, there's the Opal Staff. It's just, you know, homing staff like Spectre Staff, but just not nearly as good. And for tactical, there's the Psycad Storm. It's kind of, I guess, in the same group as what you'd call like one of my airstrike stratagems, but instead of shooting one projectile, it creates a big spray of Psycad needles that just cover everything, which makes it not very effective. But if you have an enemy marked, whatever enemy is closest to your cursor that is marked, all of the needles will be focused on that enemy, which means they'll just take a ton of damage. And again, Summoner, haven't done anything yet. It's a little hard for me. Now, another set of stuff that I made that's also in pre-hard mode that I won't show you all of yet, that's tied into a new event that I'm making, which I actually have started working on, unlike a lot of the stuff that I'm just talking about hypothetically doing, is an insectoid invasion. It's sort of, you know, how I was talking about like my tactical class being inspired by the stratagems in Helldivers 2. I basically just wanted to make Terminids as a Terraria invasion. I just thought it would be a cool idea. And there's going to be different tiers of the insectoid invasion with different equipment you can get. The different tiers, like the one in hard mode, gives you this polymer material, which makes some futuristic kind of militaristic type weaponry, which I'm still working on. But in pre-hard mode, you get an armor set from this chitin material that would be for the tactical class, and you also can make a bunch of weapons out of this chitin material. Now, one I will show you just because I'm really proud of it and really just want to show it, is this kind of flying knife inspired type thing called the dragonfly knife. Now, unlike the flying knife, which, you know, say you put your cursor over here, then the knife is going to go woo, 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 just like back and forth. It just goes back and forth, like swiping at stuff. The dragonfly knife is always just going to follow your cursor, more like a magic missile. But when I made it, I realized, well, if it just works like a magic missile, but it doesn't dissipate when you hit the target, you can just send it out, hold your cursor on top of an enemy, and then they're dead. So then I gave it a limit on how many enemies it can actually hit, or how many times it can hit the same enemy, let's just say. And then I just realized it wasn't really fun. It was just like a magic missile, but not as cool. I tried adding some like particle effects, I gave it motion blur, which, you know, made it a little more satisfying to use, but it still just, I felt like it needed something to set it apart. So what I did is that the faster the projectile is moving, the higher its damage and knockback will be, which means that if you're just holding it on top of an enemy, it's barely gonna do anything. Like, it's only gonna do like 15 damage or something. But if you are flinging your mouse across your desk, just sending that knife as fast as it can go, it's gonna do a lot more damage and have some insane knockback, and you can just juggle stuff in the air if you hit them right. It's actually really fun to use. I'm pretty satisfied with it. I think when I actually play this mod, when it's done, I'm gonna enjoy using that thing. I have just made so much stuff for this mod already. I'm actually kind of surprised. It's just, you know, I guess what I do when I don't have college classes going on, which, speaking of, I do need to go back to college in a couple days, so I'm really not gonna be able to work on this mod quite as much as I'd like to. So if I do make an update video to this, it's probably not gonna be for another couple months. But if you do want to support me and encourage me to keep doing this, if you guys do like what you're seeing, as I said earlier, I have a Ko-fi account in my description on this video and on my bio on YouTube if you want to support me. I don't know, up to you. I don't know why you'd pay anybody to make this shit. I don't really know how to conclude this video. Terraria.